You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik. Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. I'm here with Erik Johnson once again, and we have, about 25 questions? You ever play that game? 25 questions?
20 questions?
Yeah. I remember back in college when I had the same task to accomplish in my missions class. I had to contact a missionary and ask a bunch of questions, and I believe you received a list of questions from a college student who's taking mission courses, and you threw them out at me, and I think we're going to try to go through them.
Yes. There's actually a funny backstory I haven't even told you yet, Josh. This young man, I'm not going to say his name because it's a little embarrassing, the story I'm going to tell. He called me, and we had a great interaction. I've known him, his parents, and he's studying to be a missionary, and I think it's great. And we did all this talking on FaceTime, and he supposedly was recording all of it. And then I got a text about 11 o'clock last night. He's like, it didn't work. Could you send me an audio answer with all the answers? And I said, all right, we'll do what I can. So I thought it'd be kind of fun if we gave him two answers. We gave him two different missionaries. And if he doesn't want to do anything with it, maybe he'll get some bonus points. I don't know.
You never
know.
Excellent.
So anyway, well, we're going to try to fit this into two podcasts. And it's going to be a little more rapid fire than normal. Josh and I have a tendency to have long answers, and that has a lot to do sometimes with our internet, not so much just being talkers. But I'll go ahead and start with the first question, Josh. So this is a great one. It says, complete this sentence. The best thing about being involved in missions is what?
Ooh, that's a good question. The best thing about being involved in missions, the pages you sent me, I don't have the first two questions. So I love every aspect of missions, but I love just working with people of all different backgrounds. I think that's one of my favorite parts. And I give a quick two answer, working with family. I think in missions, you get to spend a lot of time with your family. And I love the aspect of missions where you're working with such a broad range of people of different backgrounds, whether it's on the mission field or the variety of churches that support you. I love that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Mine was a little more spiritual, but I actually listened to yours. I like that a lot. Mine was just seeing people come to the Lord, seeing them grow in their faith, and seeing their lives transformed. You think sometimes it's some of the bigger days where there's hundreds of people at your church, and those are special, but really individual basis, being in a church service and seeing people's lives and thinking, wow, I didn't do it. The Lord did it, but I am so glad I had a part in that and seeing people's lives transform and their families transform. To me, that never gets old, and that's honestly my favorite part about missions.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. Next question. Now, this is an easy one, I think, but we like food, so we gotta talk about this. Your favorite meal of all time, and it says in all place. I think the idea is probably mission field. So, what's your favorite meal or something you eat while you've been on the mission field?
Well, in Senegal, well, not Cheb, actually. I'm a big fan of Cheb, obviously, but I'm a big fan of Mafe, which is, I think in past episodes we've talked about it, but Mafe is the peanut butter mixed with tomato paste. It's made like a stew, and you put some braised meat in there with sweet potato, carrot, and it's amazing. So that would be my top dish. Now, I will say, the best hamburger I ever had was at this fast food joint in Ivory Coast in Cote d'Ivoire.
Wow.
One of Bob Mac's sons took me to this big mall, and they said, you got to try this burger. And it came out of double patties with a hash brown on it and cheese just oozing over it. It was incredible. Nice. And I can't remember the name of the place, but if you're ever in Ivory Coast, ask Brother Mac, take me to get that burger.
Sounds like well worth the trip.
What about you?
Excellent. I think, I enjoy so much good food in the Dominican, but I think the average, they call it la bandera, the average plate of the day, which is rice and beans. If you get a really good potato salad with that, their version is called a mixta salad. And then if you get on a really good time of year where they've been roasting a lot of pork, you can sometimes get at Christmas time, get some really good pork. So that sounds like about as good a day. In fact, sometimes when we get food from that place, I'll call my family. I say, I got some good eats. I'm bringing some good eats home. So they know that means we
Awesome.
got some good options today. All right, so that was an easy one. Now this one is a little more complex, and I do like this question. It took me a little while to think about it. What do you like about non-North American Christians? So it means probably those you're dealing with on the mission field, and maybe some mindsets, cultural differences. And I thought that was a really great question.
Yeah, my first really experience with non-American Christians was Canada, where I went to Bible college. And that was a great experience because in Canada, everybody looks like they're American. I mean, we're all the same background, but speak the same language, but there's a definite difference between Canadians and Americans. And
Hmm.
it really helped me to understand that there's a bigger world out there than just America. And now when I hear the phrase, I actually just saw a preacher post a video the other day, and he made this statement, and just maybe this will summarize how I feel about working with non-American Christians. The statement this American preacher made was, "We live in the greatest nation on earth." I agree with that, but I also feel like there are other great nations on earth. And it's you develop an interesting dynamic of patriotism living abroad, where you begin to see, oh, maybe we are more flawed than we think, and maybe this country isn't as flawed as we say it is. Okay. And I guess that's
100%.
the best though, working with non-American Christians is just to see that no matter where you go in the world, it's the same Jesus, the same love for Jesus,
Yeah.
the same desire to serve the Lord, and the same frailties and weaknesses that we all have universally, that there's this common bond in Christ. And I love
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you've spent any amount of time overseas, especially living in a foreign country that is far removed from America in many ways, I think you come to understand pretty quickly some of the pride issues America has, and some of it I can understand why you would have it. And anybody who's a Christian needs to always deal with pride. And so I think you come to understand how other people think when you live with them,
Mhm.
and see how you sometimes can look at a different, look at the Bible in a different way because you don't live in America. And I think that is that's just a really good thing for any believer to come to some new points in their life where they able to put some things aside of superiority or pride, and come to love other people for their sacrifice and their willingness to serve the Lord, and with nothing in return. And so I enjoy that, and I really do love with working with culturally, Dominicans or whatever. Number five, this is a great question. How old were you when you first met your first missionary, and under what circumstances?
So I don't recall if prior to this I had met other missionaries. I'm sure I had. I grew up attending my grandfather's church that he pastored, and he had missionaries in quite often, but I don't remember really engaging missionaries that would come, or getting to know them. My first
Mhm.
encounter would that I can recall was actually taking a mission trip, and I was 14 years old. Now I'm sure I met missionaries before that, and I know we had a mission-minded church, but that just wasn't on my radar. And so when I took my first mission trip, 14 years old, Jack Henderson was the missionary we visited. He lived in Texas, but would cross over into Mexico quite a bit. He had lived there many years in Mexico, started several churches, was basing out of Texas now, and still doing the work of the Lord, still involved in missions. And that was actually the that mission trip I was on, that God touched my heart and called me to be a missionary. So that was my first experience, was meeting a missionary in real life, doing the work
Yeah.
in real time, and then being called to be a missionary.
Wow. Yeah, I remember it vividly. I think I was 9 or 10. We were at like a 5 day club Bible camp where you would go in the daytime and do crafts and hear Bible messages and go home. And there was a missionary there from the Philippines named Alvin Hall.
Hmm.
And I didn't go to a church that actually had a lot of missionaries in, so it was pretty neat. And the added neat thing about him was he went to Bible college with one of my aunts, so I thought it was really neat. And I honestly do remember thinking, because I had studied, I'd read the stories of Jim Elliot and David Livingston and these people, and I was just like really amazed. And truth be told, he did do a lot of those kind of missionary works. He was in a very much in the bush, and I just thought, wow, like to be a missionary, that guy's got to be like a super Christian. So I remember that very vividly, and that stuck with me for a long, long time.
Awesome.
Good question. That's a good question. All right, this is a good one. Very practical in nature. Complete this sentence. I wish I had received more training in blank area.
I would say I wish I had received more training in everything. So to put it bluntly, I would say probably if I had to redo it, I might have taken maybe some linguistic courses,
Hmm.
just because we are working in multiple languages, and I've picked up a couple of them, but I think if I would have had a better foundation, that would have helped. And then I would say as well, maybe I should have paid attention and hung out with my dad a little more when I was a teenager and learned mechanics, because my dad's
Oh,
a terrific
yes.
mechanic, but I just wasn't interested in it. So if I would have learned a little more mechanics, I think that would have helped me out a little bit with some of the car troubles we run into once in a while here. But those are two biggest areas.
Yeah. I always say these top two, although those are very good ones, and the mechanic one is definitely one I should have done more in. Um, I think of first of all graphic design in the
Mm,
nature of our ministry, because we do a lot of flyers over the years, and we do the PowerPoints for church and have since the beginning. Just not having nearly as we have an excellent eye, but we didn't always have an excellent way to how to make those things, and
right.
so. I praise the Lord. My wife has really developed that skill over the years, and through the use of Canva, has been a terrific help in that area. So I would encourage people, if you're going to be a church planting missionary and you're going to be in a place where you're going to be doing PowerPoints and making flyers, really do spend time learning that skill. Nowadays, it's easier than ever to find materials, but there's also a skill to that you need to learn. And then the second one is more spiritual in nature. Is I wish I had taken more a time to learn more about counseling. We get
Mm,
some of the most unique situations. I mean, even this week, I just every week there's a new scenario. I have people I lean on. Sometimes I'll ask these questions, and often they'll be like, "You got some of the hardest, difficult people I've ever met in my life, or heard the scenarios in my life." And so, we know the Bible has all the answers, but learning how to properly counsel people in a biblical way is something that I would encourage all young people in Bible college to get as many of those kind of courses as you possibly can.
very good.
All right. Next one. Now we can take a little bit of time. We're going through these pretty good. So some of these questions we can kind of camp on a little bit. Because I think this is important for young people who are considering being missionaries, Josh, that
Hmm.
they should understand the realities of. Because sometimes we do romanticize, seeing people's lives changed and seminaries and Bible started, and that is the goal, and we praise the Lord when that happens. But that's not to say there aren't speed bumps along the way.
Hmm.
And so this next question kind of deals with that when it says, what are some struggles or hardship on your field?
I would say there's two primary for this field in particular. One is isolation and just not having much contact. And this year, really little to no contact with people of the same culture as us. We obviously have
Mhm.
great friends in the ministry here, and we're thankful for those friendships we've cultivated with church members and those in our community. But having contact with people who, think the same way as you, grew up in the same culture, um, that's something you do need when you're living overseas. And you can, especially in a place like this, start to feel more isolated, especially where our culture is so different here than it is having grown up in the US, or in the case of my wife, Canada. And then whatever whatever areas of weakness you have, and maybe if you're a little bit weak in the language, maybe if maybe if you struggle, whatever struggle you have on the mission field, it's going to be magnified that much more, and you're going to feel that much more inadequate sometimes. And so I would say, like, the isolation is more on the side of my family, affects them a little more. Whereas on my side, I would say for me, it's wanting to do everything and just not being gifted to do everything,
Mhm.
and not being able to implement everything as fast as you would like to. Like you have a vision, you have a drive that God gives you as a man in ministry, as a leader, and yet you have to balance that out with the pace of the growth of your ministry, who you can delegate it to, who you're able to train. You have to be able to balance out, okay, if I implement this ministry, is it going to continue in the long term? If I step away from it. And so there's so many angles you have to approach. And I find that added element of most of the struggles we have on the mission field are the same struggles that pastors and ministry leaders have in the States or Canada. It's just you have more barriers, you have more challenging levels to go through. Like you have a language barrier, you have cultural misunderstandings. And so while they may be the same struggles, they're amplified, I think, that much more because you've got more coming at you to try to overcome and solve these problems. And so sometimes it can be overwhelming trying to navigate that world. Like I'm right now in the middle, we're in the middle of a building project, and I'm trying to find the right guy to work. I had one guy that a head mason that I hired. He's doing a great job, but he's just so slow. And I just, I can't get him to work faster. So I'm going to have to, when we start the ministry side, there's some buildings we want to put up. I have to find somebody else because I just can't go at this pace he's going at. And so when I was talking to Daniel Jenkins, missionaries that were in Gambia, now they're in Nova Scotia, he had a construction background. And so he was out there every day. He was the general contractor. He was in charge. I don't have that same gift. Like I have to have somebody else in charge of the actual day-to-day work, and I supervise it. But Daniel was like, this got to get done. You're not working hard enough. You're fired. He had that personality and know-how. He knew if somebody wasn't meeting a certain standard, whereas I just don't, that's not my gifts. But so sometimes I'm like, man, I wish I had that, or I wish I had somebody here with us that could do that. So I think those are probably the two biggest struggles. Obviously, I think there's more, you can get into healthcare and just limited access and things like that. But I would say the two that stand out, especially currently, would be those two I mentioned.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think, being isolated, obviously in Africa where you are, having fewer like-minded missionaries or even known kind of close is different than us. We do have access to that if we want it, but we all get busy in the ministry and sometimes can just self-isolate. I think for us, though, personally, it's more of, and we understood this from the very beginning of being one of those things where you weren't going to be there for every wedding, you weren't going to be there for probably every funeral, you weren't going to be there you weren't going to be there for very many Christmases or birthdays of your family. I come from a very large family, and so as much as we are thankful that they include us sometimes in FaceTime calls or will send us pictures, that is something that is one of the hardships of being a missionary, is just not being there often to celebrate with family for things, and learning also as our kids now are getting older and we go home frequently for short spouts or spurts. And, as our kids learn to meet other kids, they will see some of the things they're missing out on. And though our kids have a terrific spirit about it, they understand the things they get to do, living close to a beach, having friends, having flexibility. When we go to America, going to all different parts of the country, there are some great advantages, learning another language, learning other cultures. My boys get certain things and the aspect of my sports ministry that most boys don't ever get.
Right.
So they understand that, but at the same time, they understand that they're missing out on some things as well. And so as a parent, we feel called, we have a strong, sense of that, but at the same time, that's a hardship you have to deal with and constantly give it over to the Lord. And then, like you mentioned, sometimes for health reasons, as we're getting older, we're a little more creaky and we have a little more health situations, and just understanding the access to good health care, the way healthcare works here. Not that America's got it all figured out, but just
Sure.
the quality of healthcare. So those are just simple things. Young prospective missionary that we're talking about. Once again, these aren't complaints. We're probably two of the guys would be most excited to say we're missionaries. We want to keep doing it. But you should understand these realities before you feel like you can get on that plane on a one-way ticket, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Those are, and this is what I love about uh, part of why we did this podcast is just to have discussions, be transparent about missions. And I think that
Hmm.
sometimes going into missions, there's a big romanticized, view of it. And when you hit reality and you don't have your feet anchored to the ground with understanding what you're about to face, then it can be discouraging, sometimes quit. So definitely, I think that I think we should be able to discuss these things transparently
Hmm.
without being pessimistic about it. And
Exactly.
they're struggles that everybody faces. And I think for the missionary, if you're a veteran missionary listening to this, I think it would do well to remember that you're not alone in these struggles. There are pastors, multitudes of pastors in the
Hmm.
US that feel alone, isolated, just they feel like they're going at it alone. And so the challenges are the same. Yes, I think there are more obstacles when you're on the mission field just because you're in a different culture, but at the
Hmm.
heart of it, some of the same struggles. And if you keep that in mind as a missionary, just know, some pastors are going through the same thing. Reach out to a pastor who's been through a
Yeah.
struggle and how did he get through it? How did he navigate it?
Yeah.
So
There's a really unique thing with pastors and missionaries, and that whether it's a missionary with a missionary, or a pastor with a pastor, or a pastor with a missionary, that you can commiserate without complaining.
mm,
And by hearing, some other gentleman is going through, a different trial, but a trial nonetheless, and he can stay faithful and have a good spirit and have the joy of the Lord, that often can serve our heart. As long as the two parties can center on the Lord and realize, ministry is not always celebrating times, it's difficult times as well.
mm,
There's a reality of, that guy, he's going through it even more than I am, and he's sticking by it. I can do the same. And I don't know if it's just that's built in men that way, but sometimes there's a great fellowship in just knowing, yeah, we're all going through difficulties, but we're staying true, and that can help you kind of get up for the next day.
absolutely. That's good.
All right, let's go on the next one. This one should be a fun one here. Very practical for this day and age. I don't know when this podcast is going to air, so it could actually have a lot more significance in a few weeks. But how do you feel about how things are going on presently in the United States of America? You could also say Canada, which is kind of a whole nother thing.
I would say this, living outside of the US and from the outside looking in, things are not as bad as we are told it is, but they
Hmm.
are pretty bad. But they're not as bad as what
Right.
the average, you know, Christian especially is told things are in America. I would say concerning Canada, things are way worse than we're told. It's bad up there now. But it's no, yeah, I think that I get a kick out of American politics now. I think it's good that people take a stand for what's morally right, and
Hmm.
there's tough decisions in politics. As Christians, you got to navigate that world. And here, it's Christian. Here, people have the same kind of struggles. Christians have to navigate who to vote for. And, every
Hmm.
person running for president is Muslim with Muslim
Hmm.
ideologies. Um, and so Christians have to navigate that world of, what they think is best choice and stuff. But um, I would just say, yeah, I don't think things are as bad as sometimes they make it out to be in America. And but at the same time, it is a serious situation, and I pray for the country and pray the right person gets put into power. But you learn as a missionary that God's in control of everything, and He's in control of the politics. And um, yeah, I don't not much else without getting too political. I could add to it, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I know. I used to really be into politics like I am into sports
Yeah.
when I was younger. And I used to be involved in campaigns. And then, kind of as I grew up into a young adult, I used to always have this good guys, bad guys mentality until being part of a few campaigns with people who weren't necessarily, they weren't Christians, that I realized not everybody's the good guy, bad guy. There's just sometimes bad guy, bad guy.
Right.
And so I really turned my focus to eternal things, and I'm thankful for that. So one of the reasons I became a missionary. But I do still every 4 years pay very close attention from afar.
Hmm.
And I can say I don't think it's anything crazy to see that we are getting worse and worse in our cultures. And I've
Hmm.
never been more thankful. It's interesting to say this way, that to raise my children in this culture,
Mm.
uh, than the predominantly godless culture in the United States. And I'm thankful there are a lot of issues that I can that they have their own sin issues here, but I almost feel like in many ways I can tackle those a lot easier with a mentality with what's kind of transpired even just in the last 5 years in the majority of our culture. And I know that sometimes even Christians back home, Josh, can isolate themselves from what's really going on in big parts of America.
Hmm.
And I think there's a possibility that God, he stems some of this wave of cultural ideology for a little while, but it's never goes in reverse. Sometimes waves can be smaller, sometimes they can be larger. And I think as Christians, it's just never more apparent that, we have to be busy in the Lord's work because he's coming back one day. I've never felt more emboldened to teach my kids how to stand up for right because we all may suffer some persecution
Hmm.
before too long for standing up for the right things. I think post pandemic, it's been amazingly eye opening how the church has changed, the
Sure.
evangelical church, and I don't think that's going back. And I think that's probably a good thing. I remember a very well known pastor talk about persecution for the believer in the church is not necessarily a bad thing. Really separates those who truly follow the Lord. And I think that is kind of my biggest takeaway. Is like I pray for America. I pray for them to continue to return to uh, their 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 precepts from the beginning, their desires. But at the same time, as a missionary who relies a lot on America, I've thought a lot and worked a lot harder on not being so reliant on that because we don't know how life's going to change in the
Mhm.
next 5 or 10 years. That sounds kind of gloom and doom, but we know the Lord's in control, and
It's true.
we pray the Lord continues to work in the lives of leaders. But if the leaders aren't turning to God, and I don't see a lot of leaders on any side of the aisle that are turning to God, then your hope just has to keep being fixed on the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. And I see, that an example was I met up with a friend recently when I was in the States. He had moved out of state and we happened to be able to connect. And he doesn't go to church. I don't think he's a believer, but we hadn't seen each other for probably 25 years. And so we're chatting and he had kids he had adopted and they're grown now, they're late teens. And he said, I don't understand what the problem is. Like I raised them to be Republican, but they're all as liberal as get out. And I thought, well, that's not enough. It's not enough to raise your kids Republican or conservative, even without Jesus and without Christian community. That doesn't really matter. And so I think there needs to be a robust Christian politic where we take a stand and we make our voice
Mm-hmm.
heard. And I think America still has that opportunity. And I think we shouldn't back down when we're told by, elite that, Christians got to keep their mouth shut and you can't get out there and voice,
Right.
opinion and separation and all that. Take the opportunity to take a stand. But if the day does come, Christianity is not going to suffer when there's opposition. It's the nation that will suffer, and the nation that forgets God. What does it say?
Mm-hmm.
Will be turned into hell. And
Yeah.
so, our job as Christians is continue to preach the gospel, even when the nation is, as Psalm says, is being turned into hell. And so, whatever direction America takes, we know Christ is faithful, and so I'm encouraged by that. Yeah.
Amen. All right. This is a next one's a very interesting one, and one I had to kind of wrestle with a little bit. And it says, "What keeps you up at night?" Now, the obvious answer is caffeine, but I don't think that's what they're looking for.
Well, for us, it's the chanting and the call to prayer. They, especially on
Oh.
Thursday night, they'll go until 1 a.m. in the morning. 2 hours straight, they'll just repeat the name Allah. And they'll just go
Mm.
Allah, 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 Allah. And yeah, it can get it's loud and it's repetitive and it keeps you awake. But I think they're looking for, what are some things that you're sitting there meditating on,
Anxieties.
thinking about
Hmm.
anxieties. And I have to be honest with you, I do most of my worrying during the day, and then when I go to bed, I just go to bed. Like I'm
That's good.
out. And so nothing, rarely anything really keeps me awake at night. Um, Sometimes I will say, Eric, sometimes if I am laying there awake, I am thinking about, am I balancing? And this is one thing that does keep me awake sometimes. Am I balancing my time with my family with what I'm doing and investing in the ministry for the Lord? Because my kids are going to be my oldest son at 2 years and he's out of the house off to
Mhm.
college. Have I been a wise steward of my time as a father with my children? And I'm always very hard on myself. And so sometimes I'll just sit there thinking, man, I should have done that and I should be doing this and I
Mhm.
need to implement that. And so that'd be one of the things I would say. But the biggest thing is to grow, just keep growing
Mhm.
and try to if you see a weakness to develop it, strengthen it. What about
Yeah,
you?
I think there's seasons of life sometimes that I've noticed in my life different stages where there are certain anxieties. I can't even remember what they are now. I mean, sometimes it may be a long trip, and you can be an anxious person. I'm a detail oriented person, so sometimes before a long trip, I'm like thinking, do we have all this stuff in it? So there's those kinds of anxieties sometimes that I've noticed even in the last couple of years. I really had to work on um, dealing with just trusting the Lord, trusting in the Lord's given you a mind to prepare these things, and once they're prepared, and if something goes wrong, the Lord allowed it. Stop worrying about it. And so that's kind of like a baseline thing that just as a personality, being a detail oriented person, I've had to struggle with over the years.
Mm,
Being overly prepared and planning something. But I'd say the secondary one and the real one, like you're kind of talking about, it does have to do with kids. I don't know that we have the kind of life, and we've been thankful. We're slower plotters. We don't do as big a vision. So I feel very confident that when my kids leave the home, they're going to have said, we spent lots of time together.
mm,
But I do often think about the preparation still. Have we prepared them for this? Have we taught them this? They can be practical, they can be spiritual in nature. And so those are the things that honestly in the last year I've really thought a lot about, even at nighttime, and talked to my wife about is like, are we preparing them correctly to be shoving them out here in the next, it's going to be like 2, 4, 6, 8 years. And,
sure.
and, um, so those are the things that I think just being a parent and, I think it's interesting. Both of our responses really didn't have a lot to do with ministry. I think that might show that, we understand the Lord is in charge of that. And as
Hmm.
long as we're faithful to this part, but I think because the kids in our family are the most important,
Yeah.
that kind of keeps us awake at night sometimes. But
Yeah.
all right, this is one, and I'm looking at our time. We still got a little bit of time here.
Yeah.
Out of all the people in your mission agency, and I guess this could be those who work at the home office or missionaries, but people you've just dealt with in missions. And later on, there's a question about specific missionaries. Uh, who particularly stands out as someone who really understands missionaries and why?
I'm going to say right off, and I love our mission agency. And what I love about it is we have directors who were missionaries on the field. And so
Hmm.
every director gets it. But of all the men that were in our mission agency specifically, who have had the biggest impact is the late Ron Bragg, who actually just passed away on
Yes.
Saturday. And he had kind of dived in health there. And I'm so
Hmm.
glad back in February I got to go
Yes.
see him and his wife. He, of course, was missionaries here in Senegal for 17 years and
Yep.
then was the African director. He was the first missionary I met after my buddy and I pulled a country out of the hat and said, we're going to go to
Mm.
Senegal. And so he was such a humble person. I went to some of the neighbors here and told them that, Papa Bragg died
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
Saturday. And people were just like, oh, he was just the everybody's testimony was there was nobody they had ever met like him here in this, in this community. The ones who still remember him, many of them do. Nobody like Ron Bragg. Nobody like him. He was just a unique guy. And so he got it. But not only did he get missionaries, but he got to the heart of it right away. When he met you, he wasn't messing around. He said, hey, what are you struggling with?
Hmm.
Where can I pray for you? This and
Hmm.
that. So I really appreciated Brother Bragg. What about you?
Wow, yeah, this was a difficult one because there's so many, and I don't know, I can choose one, but I mean, it wouldn't be surprising to pick his parallel partner in the faith there, Brother Godfrey is
Hmm.
another one that just, he really has seen it all as well and has all the stories and really is a very relatable person, a person you can get close to and talk to about missions. Who, you know, when we're on the prayer letter, we have a connection with his family, obviously, and you for the time there in Senegal. But he'll write you prayer emails asking
Mhm.
about you, telling what's going on in their lives, and that means a lot. There's a gentleman on the mission field here who's been here up to 30 years. His name is Steve Sidler. I've known him since the day I landed. We could pray for him. He's going through a lot of health needs right now in the States. But just a very humble servant of God,
Sure.
the kind of person that, the world might not notice, but boy, he's had an amazing impact on this island. They've sent out, I think, upwards of 15 different families from their church all over the island being missionaries, and just
Wow.
someone that, you know, it's so funny when we go to pastor fellowships, Dominican fellowships, and I'll be there. And there's one particular pastor who's kind of like the Paul Chappell of the island. He's really well known. And he'll get up and he'll be thankful for American missionaries, and he'll be like, "Hey, brother Eric's here. He's a great missionary." But the best missionary on this island is Brother Steve Sidler, and he just loves Brother Steve Sidler. And I just get a kick out of that. Every time you see Brother Aguero, he's always just talking about how great a missionary Brother Steve Sidler is. And it's because he wants the nationalists to know someone who had poured their lives into their country, and seeing probably no single person have more of an impact for starting churches. And so that's someone, just he understands missions. And I know we're talking about missionaries, but those are the kind of people who have the biggest impact.
Well, amen. Well, let's close out there, and we'll continue with these questions in the next episode. Be sure to like and subscribe, whatever platform you're on. Share it with somebody that you think might be blessed out of this. If you know a college student who is taking a missions course, give them this cheat code here, and they can get all these answers down. So, all right. Well, this is Josh from Senegal, West Africa.
Erik in the DR.
God bless. Have a great week.